Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It's Friday, January 7th, 2022. I'm Andrew Hanson alongside Josh Crash Davis, and it's time to talk some Week 18 NFL DFS. Crash, you ready for the last regular season week?
Yeah, the last week. Can't believe it's already here. But here we are. We're in 2022, so ready to get into it.
That's right, and it's a very interesting week with playoff implications. Certain teams very interested in playing hard and to the final whistle today, this weekend, and other teams not so interested. So we're going to go through that at the top of the show here to get everybody ready. Then we'll go position by position as we always do, and then of course we'll have our Saturday show previewing the Saturday night games separately. So make sure to tune in for that. But let's start here going through these matchups because the playoff positioning, I think, is ultra important here in Week 18, on top of the injury news, et cetera, which we'll mix in. But just going through from 1 o'clock through, and by the way, there's 13 games on the main slate, 7 early kickoffs, 6 late kickoffs. All 6 late kickoffs are at 4:25 Eastern, which is kind of nice and tidy. We don't have that staggered start for the late games, but I think the NFL did a great job of organizing the teams at the kickoff times that are fighting against each other. So they really minimized the situation where a team, you would think they were going to play hard, but then something happened in an early game and that changes their strategy. So it's pretty balanced in that respect. So let's start with Cincinnati, Cleveland. Cincinnati is the one team for me that it seems like they have a tiny bit of reason to play because they do have a small chance at the number 1 seed, but not if the Chiefs win on Saturday. So they most likely will not have anything to play for, and Mixon is out. And we know that Cleveland on the other side is eliminated. So that game is probably going to be a dud in terms of teams being motivated.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Burrow is out, Mixon's out, and then Jamar Chase is questionable. So
right,
obviously their top 3 guys right there.
Yeah, and Chase is 12 yards from the team record. So they may, even if he plays, that doesn't mean play him because he may just get a couple catches and then sit. So we don't want to go to any of the stars for Cincinnati. Green Bay, Detroit, no motivation there. Of course, your Packers are all set with the number 1 seed. What's your latest thought on if their starters go, how long they might play?
Yeah, I think they will start their starters. Matt LaFleur has made it very clear that he wants to go into the playoffs with some momentum. Doesn't want them to have 3 weeks without playing, basically. So I do think the starters will start. I think they'll probably play maybe a quarter and a half, and then they'll pull them.
Okay. So a situation to avoid there. Detroit, of course, eliminated from the playoffs for a long time, so they're just playing for pride. Chicago, Minnesota, both eliminated from the playoffs, but these are 2 teams I think that are a little more interesting than most of the others in this position because their coaches have their jobs on the line potentially, and so I think they'll push a little bit harder than some of these other teams. Washington and the Giants both eliminated, so not much to like there. Colts and Jags. So from here on out, we have at least one team in every game with something really important to play for. The Colts, of course, if they win, they're in. So they're ultra motivated. Jags eliminated, of course. Steelers and Ravens. This is the first game where both teams have something to play for. They both need to win and get help to get in. So both of these teams are going to be battling as hard as they can. Tennessee and Houston. Tennessee, if they win, they clinch the number 1 seed in the AFC. So they'll be getting after it against the 4-12 Texans. And then in the late games, we start with New Orleans and Atlanta. New Orleans, if they win and San Fran loses, then they're in. So I think the Saints will be going hard against the Falcons, who are eliminated. Jets and Bills, of course, the Bills can win the division if they win this game against the Jets. Big favorites. 49ers and Rams. Here's the other game with 2 teams pushing hard. The 49ers, they need to win to get in, or a loss or a tie from the Saints. And again, those games are happening at the same time, so you got to figure 49ers will be pushing, and they can't rely on the scoreboard watching until possibly really late in the game. Rams, if they win their division, so there's some playoff seeding motivation there. Next game, we have Patriots and the Dolphins. If the Patriots win, they might win the division if the Bills lose. And they even have an outside shot at the number 1 seed. So I think the Patriots will push pretty hard against the Dolphins. And then in the final 2 games, we've got Arizona hosting Seattle. Seattle eliminated, of course, but Arizona can win the division if the Rams lose. So Arizona should push. And then last game, Carolina eliminated Tampa. A little bit of motivation. They've already clinched the division, but they can get to the number 2 seed if they win and the Rams lose. So hopefully that gives everybody a nice overview here. And for me, it's going to be like if 2 guys are kind of close, I'm going to side with the team ultra motivated here in week 18.
Yeah, for sure. And, I was watching the Manning cast on Monday night, and they were interviewing Roger Goodell, and he was talking about how they wanted to make it to where these games would mean something, So even if you don't have a playoff position or something like that on the line, you still have a divisional matchup. You've got teams that don't like each other. They keep that added motivation. So,
yeah, and with the extra playoff team, it has brought many more teams into the mix this year. It's been exciting.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's now go position by position with that as our backdrop. Let's start with quarterbacks. And if you're going to pay up this week, Josh, where are you looking?
I'm looking at the same guy I went to last week, Josh Allen, 8,800 on FanDuel, 8,100 on DraftKings. He has a good matchup against the Jets. They've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Last week, Allen, even though he didn't get much done through the air, he was able to find the end zone twice on the ground. Last time when he faced the Jets, Allen had 3 interceptions, but he still scored almost 24 DraftKings points. So I don't expect him to throw those interceptions. I do expect him to find more success through the air than he did last week. And I think he'll have a nice, ceiling type game this week against the Jets.
They are the monster favorites. No doubt about it. All right, for me, I'm looking at Kyler Murray, a little bit cheaper than Allen. He's got Seattle. This is actually the highest total on the board at 48. Arizona favored by 6.5. And interesting this week that out of the 13 games, this is the only one with a total over 45. So significantly higher here for Murray and company. They've got that great matchup because Seattle's 31st in passing yardage allowed. And if you look back at when these teams played before, it was Colt McCoy starting, and he threw for 328 and 2 against Seattle. So I certainly think Murray can match that. I like how he's been throwing it a lot. 38 attempts last week against Dallas, a couple touchdowns. He ran it for 44 yards. And in the 3 weeks before that, he had at least 40 attempts every week. So I feel pretty good about Murray, and we know that he's always involved with the Arizona scoring. Is about as much as any quarterback can be, sort of similar to Josh Allen, because he can run some in as well. So Kyler Murray's a big target for me this week.
Yep, I like Murray as well.
All right. Who else you got in the queue?
Looking at Ben Roethlisberger. He's 5,400 on DraftKings, so really nice price there. I didn't feel like there's that many great matchups on the slate, but he definitely has one of them against Baltimore that's allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. We've been targeting them a lot lately, and I see no reason why not to go back to them, especially with Deontay Johnson being activated from the COVID list today. So that's going to give him his favorite target. In week 13, he went up against Baltimore. He completed 21 of 31 for 236 and 2 touchdowns for 19.3 DraftKings points, which is pretty good value at a price of 5,400. So definitely like Big Ben and what I guess is going to be his last game.
Yeah, I mean, small chance that they get in the playoffs, but last regular season game, of course.
Yeah.
And I agree. I'm interested there. Great matchup. And, I'm hesitant because of the way he looked last week. But remember, that was a very emotional game, his last home game. And the key is that he continues to throw it a lot, and he's not getting a lot per attempt in terms of yardage. There are a lot of short targets. He had some incompletions that were a little bit unexpected, uncharacteristic. So if he cleans that up a little bit, I think he'll be more settled and be more productive, more efficient against Baltimore. So he's on my radar as well. But there's another guy I want to mention in between here with pricing. Taysom Hill, 6,200 on DraftKings. He's got Atlanta on the road. Lower total here of 40, but the Saints are favored by 3.5. because, again, if they win and San Fran loses, they'll be in the playoffs. And in his 4 starts, Taysom has averaged 20.2 DraftKings points. So that's better than a 3x return right there if he hits it again.
Yeah.
And he's had a rushing floor of 33 yards, pretty solid. He's had 2 games over 200 passing yards. So it's just a matter of how often he gets in the end zone. And I do like that this game is on the turf. So I like Hill to take advantage there and use his speed and legs, and I think they're just going to absolutely just turn it over to him and rely on him to keep them eligible for the playoffs, depending on what happens with San Fran.
Right.
All right, great. Well, let's turn to the running back position. And why don't you kick us off? I think there's a pay-up guy here that some folks might be interested in.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor, the guy that we've been playing quite a bit. He's 10-2 on FanDuel, but he's 9,300 on DraftKings. He is the most expensive back on the slate. But going up against Jacksonville, Indianapolis is in a must-win situation this week. I expect them to rely pretty heavily on Taylor. In Week 10, he carried the ball 21 times for 116 yards and a touchdown. Was also heavily targeted in the passing game in that game, a season high at 8 targets. Pro Football Focus has him as their highest projected scoring running back with 22.1 fantasy points. And last week, the Patriots got 4 rushing touchdowns. Stevenson had 19 for 107 with 2 touchdowns, and Damian Harris also found the end zone twice. So definitely should be some opportunities here for Taylor.
Yeah, if he can combine what those Patriots running backs did, he's going to have another monster game. And he's had 4 straight with over 100 on an absolute roll for the Colts. One guy I'm looking at here, if we're going to save a little bit, go mid-tier, it's David Montgomery up against Minnesota. And again, both of these teams are eliminated, but I think they'll both play pretty hard for pride here. We've seen that with the Bears lately, and Montgomery getting a lot of touches. Nagy relying on him. He got the last 2 weeks, 28 and 24 touches. And then before that against Minnesota, he had 23 touches. So that's the game plan they used there. In a strong matchup, Minnesota 27th in yardage allowed to running backs. So I'm looking at Nagy to, get it to Montgomery again a bunch here.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, who's next for you?
Next for me is going to be Devin Singletary. He's even 6,000 over on DraftKings. He's got the best matchup of the week against the Jets. They've allowed the most fantasy points to running backs. He had a little bit of a slow start this year, but Singletary's really picked it up the last couple of weeks. Last week, he had his best game of the year with 23 carries for 110 and 2 touchdowns for 26 DraftKings points. I think this is a really nice matchup for him. I think he'll probably go lower owned, and especially nice play in tournaments. Pro Football Focus has him projected as the 6th highest scoring running back, and there's 17 running backs that are priced above him. So really nice value here for Singletary.
Yeah, and as I look out the window here, Josh, the snow is blowing, and this could be a weather game, so we'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah,
because that can certainly help running backs.
Definitely.
One more for me here. Deontay Foreman, 5,700 on DraftKings. Real strong game last week against Miami. They gave it to him 26 times, 132 yards, got in the end zone. And King Henry is coming back, it looks like, but not yet.
Not yet.
And so I think they're just going to ride Foreman here. That's the style they want to play with Vrabel. Great matchup. 32nd in yards allowed here. Houston, Tennessee, big favorites. I think he's going to get every opportunity here. They want to secure the win, get that number 1 seed, and then turn it over to King Henry. So Foreman should get a bunch of totes this week.
Going up against his old team, too.
That's Houston. Right.
Yep.
All right. And one more for you?
Yeah, one more for me. Michael Carter, he's 5,000. He only got 3 carries last week because he left with a concussion against Tampa, but he did get 54 yards on those 3 carries. And, I feel like it's going to be like you mentioned earlier, the weather could be an impact here. So the forecast right now is calling for a mix of rain and snow. So the Jets could rely pretty heavily on the run as well. And I feel like if he could have some success against the Bucs and their stingy run defense, that he could probably do some damage against Buffalo too. So nice little tournament play here at only 5,000.
Yeah, and in that same price range, I'm also looking at the Tampa Bay backs. the Cincinnati backs. And so we'll monitor those situations and the weather, and then make those final picks on Sunday. When we do that, before we get to wide receivers and tight ends, we'll set those out for our members with the DraftKings coaches clipboard, and then our full lineups on FanDuel and Yahoo, the GPP and cash lineups. So jump in with us if you want to join us for Week 18. Go to dfscoachtalk.com and sign up there, and then we'll invite you into our Discord with an email, and we'll give the lineups out Sunday just after noon Eastern. But we do have the Saturday game, so jump in tonight or tomorrow morning to take advantage of that. All right, Josh, how about some wide receivers on this main slate?
Yeah, we're going to start at the top here with Cooper Kupp. He's 9,700 over on DraftKings. Top 10 matchup. San Francisco's allowed the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. In Week 10, Kupp went up against them. He had 11 catches for 122 on 13 targets for 26 DraftKings points. Pro Football Focus has him as their highest projected scoring wide receiver this week with 24.5, which is almost 5 points above the second highest, which is Justin Jefferson. And they also give Kupp a 98.8 matchup when he's matched up against Ambry Thomas, who he's supposed to be matched up against the most. So I like that matchup for him, obviously, as well.
Yeah, he's got big numbers on the season. He's got some records in reach. So I do think Kupp will be heavily targeted as usual, again, in that key game here. And I'm actually looking at a guy on the other side named Deebo Samuel. And I think this could be a fun, entertaining game where they kind of go back and forth, fighting for the playoffs and the division. And let's look back at what Deebo did the first time they met. Remember, that was the breakout game where he just dominated PPR. He had the 5 catches for 97 yards and a score, and they handed it to him for 36 yards and another score on the ground. And so at 8,500, you get a little savings off Kupp if you just want to go with one of them on DraftKings. And I mean, the game plan worked pretty well last time out, so I wouldn't be surprised if Deebo is a central figure again.
Yeah, definitely like Deebo too.
All right, so if we head down a little bit down the ranks of the pricing, who else are you considering?
Yeah, you could look to pair Ben Roethlisberger, spoiled it, with Deontay Johnson. 7,600 on both sides. He was activated from the COVID list today. Baltimore's allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. It's a matchup that we've continuously targeted of late. He is also continuing to be the highest targeted wide receiver by far for Roethlisberger. He saw 15 targets last week. He's had double-digit targets in 11 games this year. And I don't think that Baltimore is going to shadow him the way they did with Adams and Kupp. So I think it's shaping up to be a nice day for Deontay.
Yeah, the way he moves around the formation and has all those crossing patterns, it would be hard to shadow him. So I like Deontay as well. Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm looking at him in the $6,800 spot on DraftKings against your Packers, but of course they're not going to play full tilt for 4 quarters, and it hasn't really mattered lately who the Lions have been playing or who's been at quarterback. He's had 5 straight games with either 11 or 12 targets, and 5 straight games with between 8 and 10 receptions. He's had 5 touchdowns in that span, including 1 on the ground. So they've just been featuring him, and he's been awesome.
Yeah,
nice middle price tag. So I'm going to have some shares of him again this week.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite wide receivers right now in fantasy, and actually helped me win a season-long championship this week, last week. So
nice, congrats!
Yeah,
it's always a fun bonus.
Definitely a big fan of St. Brown.
Yeah.
So for me, for my next option, I'm looking at Tyler Lockett. He's 6,400 on DraftKings. Arizona's allowed the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. In Week 11, he had 4 catches for 115 yards on 5 targets for 18.5 DraftKings points. But in his last 3 games against Arizona, he's averaged 32 DraftKings points against Arizona. So something to keep in mind.
Yes, it is. I'll throw out one more here. Another Bear. It's a great matchup, on the ground or through the air. So Darnell Mooney, 5,900. And last week with Dalton, He had 13 targets, so certainly a favorite target there. Another strong week, 69 yards and a touchdown. And did you notice, Josh, that he is the best matchup on the week, according to Pro Football Focus, with a 100 matchup rating? So thank you again to Pro Football Focus for everything throughout the year. It certainly helps us prepare to be able to take advantage of all their data and analytics. And of course, we share those with our members. So um, Mooney is in play for me as well. And we'll add another receiver or two for the members. Some value options. We've had some good success lately with those guys, including Braxton Berrios, among others, who's been a lot of fun. So probably not Berrios this week since he's doubtful, but we'll see what we end up with. Tight ends, though, let's hit a couple of those before we go to our team defenses. So I'll start there as a pay-up option. Mark Andrews is 7,500 on DraftKings. So it's a tough one for me because I'd like to pay up for a couple receivers, and I just don't know if I'll be able to get to his price tag. But, playing multiple lineups, I'll have to get to him at least once because if you look at what Huntley's done lately in those 4 games he started, Andrews has averaged 10 targets a week and had 4 touchdowns in those 4 games. And with everything on the line for Baltimore, you'd think they continue to put their trust in Andrews. He's been such a stud for them all season.
Right.
So I like Andrews there at 7,500.
Yeah. Him and Huntley have definitely been hooking up regularly since Huntley started. So definitely like Andrews.
Yes, indeed.
For me, it's going to be Zach Ertz at 5,300. He has a favorable matchup this week against the Seahawks, who have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends. In week 11, he had his best game of the year against them. He had 8 catches for 88 yards, 2 touchdowns on 9 targets for 28.8 DraftKings points. So at 5,300, I think he's going to be a nice lower-owned option this week, and I think he's going to be playable in all formats.
I do too. I really like that price for him and the spot. But I want to mention a value guy here. If you want to go to the opposite end of the spectrum from Andrews and get a different build with a cheap tight end, you could look at John Bates. He's only 3,000 on DraftKings going up against the Giants. They've been okay against tight ends, but they're a bit of a mess in general here as we come down the stretch. And with Washington, Ricky Seals-Jones is out, and Rivera has talked about getting a look at some of the youngsters. I think Bates is a good candidate for that. He's had a decent season, despite being 3rd on the depth chart. 19 catches for 244 and a score. Had 3 for 35 last week against Philly. And if he has something similar and gets in the end zone, then all of a sudden you're pretty excited about that $3K price tag. So he's on my radar as a cheap play.
Yeah, for me, I've got a cheap play as well. Cameron Brate, he's only 3,100. Panthers have allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points to tight end, so it's a little bit of a tougher matchup. But he has scored a touchdown in the last 2 games, including one against Carolina. And since the Bucs have lost, Godwin and are dealing with the injury to Evans, and now they're without AB, I think the defenses are going to focus more on Evans with him being back and Gronk. And I think it's going to open up some opportunities for Brate, especially in the red zone. So at 3,100, you could do a lot worse for a guy that has a pretty high chance of getting a touchdown.
Yeah, you like a guy like him who's got more confidence, having scored touchdowns with Brady. And I could see Tampa, late in the game if they've got it in control, resting Gronk. So that could be a situation where he picks it up in the second half. All right, let's turn to the defense situation here. Where are you looking in week 18?
Yeah, I'm going back to the Bucs defense. They're 4,000, so they went down a little bit for some reason. They faced Carolina 2 weeks ago. They held them to 6 points, and their defense, the Bucs defense, scored 16 DraftKings points. Panthers have scored the 4th fewest points per game this season at only 17.9, and for the most part, the Bucs defense has been even tougher at home. So definitely look for them to have a big game.
Yeah, Carolina kind of in shambles as well. All right, I'm looking at the Bills as a pay-up option here against the Jets. Again, 16-point favorites with a 40.5 total. So very low implied total for the Jets. Could be some weather, as you mentioned. And on the season, the Jets are still right near the bottom in points. They're 24th, bottom 3rd in yardage. Bills pretty solid with 30 takeaways this year and 33 sacks. And I could see them really finishing on a high note here with that great matchup.
Yeah, I like it. And then for me, for a value play, I'm looking at the Browns. They're only 2,600. They are going up against one of the hottest offenses in the league in Cincinnati. But like we mentioned earlier, they're going to be without Joe Burrow. They're going to be without Joe Mixon with COVID. And they're going to possibly be without Jamar Chase. And even if he does play, like you said, we're not sure how long he's going to play. So in their Week 9 matchup, the Browns held Cincinnati to 16 points. They had 2 interceptions, including a pick 6, and they sacked Burrow 5 times. So I definitely like this defense at only 2,600. And as we mentioned earlier, the weather is supposed to be cold and rainy, which also should work in favor of the Browns defense.
Yeah, that could be a really low-scoring game.
Yeah.
My final pick here to mention Washington's defense, 3,100. They've got the Giants, and another low total here of only 38, with Washington favored by 7. And the Giants are 31st in points and yards this season. Last week, we saw the Bears defense just own them with 21 DraftKings points in that 29-3 win. It looks like it's going to be Fromm again this week. So Washington, I think, if you need to save those extra bucks, 3,100 on DraftKings is pretty solid.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, there's the breakdown of the main slate. If you don't mind, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like I mentioned, we've got the podcast coming later today for the Saturday games. So we're going to break those down from DFS perspective, and of course, provide the lineups for our members for those games as well. So subscribe to the channel, stick with us. And of course, we've got 7-day a week NBA podcasts continuing, along with our PGA podcast, which we just brought back this week. So appreciate all of your support. Any questions, you can find us on Twitter at DFS Coach Talk. Crash, great job all regular season. We're going to continue it through the playoffs, of course. But last main slate, so it's been a lot of fun. Excellent work.
It's been very much so. Enjoyed it very much.
All right, great. Well, on behalf of Josh Crash Davis and the rest of the DFS Coach Talk team, I'm Andrew Hanson. We'll see you next time as we look to crush it in DFS.